You may recall the incident in Newport News where the 6-year-old brought a gun to school.
Police investigation is
Newport News,
underway after a
Virginia tonight.
6-year-old boy
Now
shot.
find-
Well, that teacher has now indicated that she is going to be suing the school administrators. She's sent out through her attorney an intent to sue letter where she lays out what happened from the beginning to the end and how the administration failed to do what it should have done to keep her safe. Let's take a look at this letter.
Yeah.
Toscano Law Group, it's dated January 24th, 2023. It's sent to the Newport News School Board. Notice of intent to file lawsuit, confidential and privileged. Dear Ms. Searles Law, this letter serves as notice that I represent Abigail Zwerner and intend to file a suit against Rich Neck Elementary School administrators in connection with the shooting of Ms. Zwerner on January 6, 2023 at Rich Neck Elementary School. On that day, over the course of a few hours, 3 different times, Assistant Principal Parker was warned by concerned teachers or employees that the shooter had a gun on him at the school. This tragedy was entirely preventable if Assistant Principal Parker had done her job and acted when she had knowledge of imminent danger. But instead, the failure to act by the school administrator led to Ms. Zwerner being shot. Assistant Principal Parker did not call the police. She did not put the school on lockdown, and she did not evacuate the school. All of the details below have not yet been reported in the news media. I want you to know that the following information is based on extensive interviews with people with direct knowledge of these events. All right, she lays it down from beginning to end here. Ms. Zwerner was shot at approximately 1:59 p.m. on January 6, 2023. Earlier that day, between 11:15 a.m. and 11:30 a.m., Ms. Zwerner went to Assistant Principal Parker's office to advise her that the shooter seemed more off than usual and was in a violent mood. The shooter had threatened to beat up a kindergartner and angrily stared down the security officer in the lunchroom. Then that same day, at approximately 11:45 a.m., teacher number 2 was put on notice that the shooter told students that he had a gun in his backpack. Teacher number 2 searched the shooter's backpack at approximately 12:30 p.m. That same teacher was made aware that the shooter had taken something out of his backpack right before she searched the shooter's backpack, and the shooter put it in the pocket of his hoodie before going out to recess. Teacher number 2 immediately made Assistant Principal Parker aware that students had told this teacher at approximately 11:45 a.m. that the shooter had a gun in his backpack. Teacher number 2 then told Assistant Principal Parker that she took it upon herself to search the shooter's backpack and there was no gun. However, teacher number 2 went on to tell Assistant Principal Parker that Ms. Zwerner told her that she was concerned that the shooter had the gun on his person because Ms. Zwerner saw the shooter take something out of his backpack and put it in his pocket. Assistant Principal Parker responded to teacher number 2 that the shooter had small pockets, insinuating that he could not possibly have a gun on his person. Assistant Principal Parker should have called the police. Instead, she did not follow proper protocol and chose to do absolutely nothing. A little after 1 p.m., teacher number 3 was informed by a student from Ms. Zwerner's class that the shooter showed him a gun in the shooter's pocket while at recess, and the shooter threatened to shoot that student if he told anyone. Teacher number 3 kept that student in her class because he was so upset. She didn't want to send him back to the shooter's classroom. I almost want to stop there. So let me just say one thing about this, first of all, before I even get into it, because this is a problem I'm actually going to run into as I'm going through this. Note to anyone who is writing a letter of this sort, it is very helpful to break these passages up. So, for instance, as she covers different segments of what happened, it helps to segment it off so that people can actually follow what's being said. Because as I'm reading it now, I'm just getting a little confused and trying to make sure I keep up with the facts of where things are happening. So now we're at this point where another student has found out about the gun, has been told about the gun, and this student is so upset. The student doesn't really want to go back to class. As you can imagine, that is the case. So the principal at this point knows, but it sounds like, what's the school's policy in regards to if you have been told by other teachers that there's some concern, if you've now been told by a student that there is a gun on the property, what are you supposed to do? What's the process here? Now, let me go back to this, even though I'm probably going to have some trouble finding my spot here from where I stopped, because I wish these paragraphs were broken up. This is a really long paragraph. Come on, look at this. You're killing me with this. Let's see. Okay, we're going to go back up here where it says, teacher number 3 kept that student in her class because he was so upset she didn't want to send him back to the shooter's classroom. That's where we were. Teacher number 3 immediately called the office and told teacher number 4, who answered the office phone, that the student told her the shooter had a gun in his pocket. Teacher number 4 told teacher 3 he would tell the administration. Teacher number 4 then went directly to Assistant Principal Parker's office and told Assistant Principal Parker about the call from teacher 3. Okay, now this call, this is the connection right here, because now the assistant principal has heard that a teacher is now saying, hey, a student is now saying that this other child has a gun. Okay, so there's not this sort of conjecture out there anymore. Small pockets or not, okay, you're being given information now here. And so it's time to make a decision. Teacher number 4, like I said, then went directly to Assistant Principal Parker's office and told Assistant Principal Parker about the call from teacher 3. Assistant Principal Parker responded that she was aware of the threat and the shooter's backpack had already been searched. Teacher number 4, now remember, the backpack, yes. The person, no. Teacher number 4 then called teacher 3 and advised teacher 3 that Assistant Principal Parker was not doing anything, since Assistant Principal Parker said she already was already aware of the threat and that the student's backpack was searched. Teacher number 3 stressed to teacher number 4 that she believed the shooter did in fact have a gun and it was on his person. Okay, now teacher 4 is in a predicament here, and teacher 4 does exactly what you would do, which is, I'm going to go back to the assistant principal. It says teacher 4 then immediately went back to Assistant Principal Parker to tell her this. However, when teacher number 4 arrived at Assistant Principal Parker's office, a guidance counselor was already there telling Assistant Principal Parker the same thing, and asked Assistant Principal Parker if he could search the shooter's person for the weapon. Assistant Principal Parker's response was no, because the shooter's mother would be arriving soon to pick up the shooter. Then, approximately 45 minutes later, Ms. Zwerner was shot in her left hand and upper chest by the shooter. Ms. Zwerner was sitting at her reading table when the shooter, who was sitting at his desk, pulled the gun out of his pocket and shot her one time. Okay, let me stop here because I haven't gotten all the way through this, and it doesn't sound like they're going to get to this part here. There is a whole piece missing here. Okay, so they're giving us this part about what's going on with the assistant principal and the teachers, and this sort of conveyance of information back and forth about whether or not there's a gun, and what about the search, and are we going to search the person? All of that is laid out very well for us. And then it just goes to 45 minutes later, she's shot in her hand. It would be more helpful, again, if we've got that first part, but then we now switch to what is happening in the classroom. So for instance, it doesn't let us know anything about what happened between the time he pulled the gun out of his pocket and shot her. Literally, there is no information. It just says she was sitting at her reading table. Okay, well, what was she doing before that? What was going on before that? Did he make any comments? It's sort of this big gap in this letter. And I'm just talking about the letter here. There might be more information in the media, but I'm just talking about this letter. When you're laying out this letter, to leave this big gap here just feels inadequate. It just sort of, I can sense it. I don't know if you can sense it, but it's, I just want that filled in. It just doesn't work well for me when I'm trying to read it and follow it and make sure I understand everything that's going on. But I think the goal here is to just portray the conversation, because that really is the most important piece, the conversation, because they're alleging that this assistant principal had all of the knowledge in the world to make a different decision. All right, so we're going to go to the next big, thick paragraph. What is even more astonishing is that the shooter had a history at Rich Neck Elementary School that Assistant Principal Parker was aware of. The shooter had been removed from the school a year prior after he choked his teacher until she couldn't breathe. Then this school year, the shooter was put on a modified schedule in the fall of 2022 after the school year had started because he constantly cursed at the staff and teachers, and then one day took off his belt on the playground and chased kids trying to whip them. So I feel the need to stop there and to just sort of comment on it, because sometimes you do what you see. Moreover, the shooter had been suspended the day before the shooting, Thursday, because he slammed Ms. Werner's phone, breaking it that Wednesday, and had cursed at the guidance counselors. As if these things were not enough, I wish that could have been a new paragraph. As if these things were not enough, the day of the shooting, Ms. Werner told Assistant Principal Parker, while another teacher was in the office and overheard this conversation, that the shooter was in a violent mood and had already threatened to beat up a kindergartner. Yet, as of 12:30 p.m., when Assistant Principal Parker is informed that this same individual may have a gun, absolutely nothing is done. Nothing is done for 1.5 hours before Ms. Zorner is shot by this individual. If Assistant Principal Parker had acted on the information she was provided, then the shooting of Ms. Werner would not have happened. It is a miracle that more people were not harmed. The shooter spent his entire recess with a gun in his pocket, a gun that was loaded and ready to fire, with his hand in that pocket while lots of first grade students played. That fact is alarming. And Assistant Principal Parker was made aware at the beginning of recess that Ms. Zwerner was afraid that the shooter had a gun in his pocket. And again, nothing was done. The administration at Richmond Elementary School. Okay, so let me stop here again too. And this is just me speaking as an attorney about how I write these sorts of letters, and I break them up. I break them up into sort of background. I mean, you might want to say these are the parties, background information. And then you get to this part where you want to speak directly to what the policies were, or the piece around the law. Like you might say, you might give the statute and case law and that sort of stuff. So I break my letters up very differently from this. These are very long paragraphs, and the letter itself is not providing you any assistance in helping you follow along. So like I said before, I might start with the background, and then there are these other pieces in the middle. And then when I get to the end, there's the conclusion where I may wrap these things up in a paragraph that's really short, maybe 4 sentences or so, and then I'm done. And that helps somebody who is trying to follow your letter understand the information that you're trying to get them, help them out. I wish this letter had done more of that, but that's just me talking about how I typically lay a letter out when I'm sending it to somebody. All right, so let me go back here, because to me, then this is a new section where it should have some sort of label up there that lets you know what's coming up next. The administration at Rich Neck Elementary School showed gross negligence and willful and wanton negligence in Assistant Principal Parker's failure to report this known threat. The school administration knew as early as 12:30 p.m. that the shooter was suspected to have a gun at school. The administration did not take any steps to search the shooter or report the suspected gun to police or security. The search of the backpack was not done by the administration, but by a teacher who did it without the administration requesting it. Moreover, the teacher told the administrator that she searched the backpack and believed the gun was on the shooter's person. Even when the administration was put on notice that a student saw the gun on the shooter's person, absolutely nothing was done. This is all evidence of bad faith and reckless conduct by the administrators. Okay, then you wrap that piece up. But here's a piece that I think is missing, which I think would make this letter even stronger. And that is this piece. Remember, I mentioned earlier something about having a piece in there about the law. So in this case, you might have a section in there that covers the law. So it says this is what was negligent, and this is the law around negligence here, and this is how you acted. And then this other piece about school policy. I would directly pull from the school policy. So I would be making it very clear what I'm going to be relying on to show you that you didn't rise to the standard of conduct that's required even by your own school system. And that would be another section in the letter. And that's not in here, but we get to the conclusion in here. I just think adding that information gives your letter more substance, and it tells them too, you're putting them on notice. Hey, look, I'm going to do my homework on this. I'm going to cover every single fact that there is to cover. So it says, this last paragraph here, it is my hope that the school district will not want to drag Ms. Werner through litigation after the trauma she has sustained. The response from the school district is going to be very important and will shed light on how it views its teachers. I hope that the school district will not send a message that being shot while teaching a lesson in class by a student is merely a hazard of the job. The city's teachers need to know that this is not an acceptable risk and that the school district cares for them and that these failures will not happen again. Abby's road to full recovery will be long. As her physical condition improves, the psychological wounds cut deeply and remain fresh, and the psychological scars will be lasting. If you would like to discuss, okay, and there you have that information there, and that's the last part of it. Now, again, if you recall, this was the student who, the very young student, if I recall, 6 years old, that brought the gun to school and shot the teacher. And the teacher has now submitted this intent to sue letter by and through her attorney, stating that they are going to be suing because the school system and in particular, this particular administrator was negligent in what she should have done after being told several times what was going on and still doing nothing. So that's the letter. That's where things stand with that. And that was just as of the end of January. So if you're up to speed with what's going on with that, let me know in the comments. This is a real tragedy that we have someone this young who needs some assistance and might not be getting the assistance that he needs. So that's the underlying tragedy here, because if that child is able to get that, then these other things don't occur. So hopefully the family is working to I guess find more ways to get him some help there. But don't forget to give the video a thumbs up. We'll keep following this to see how it develops. And don't forget to subscribe. Peace.